Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you for coming. My name is Amy Draves, and I'm here to welcome Alan Eny to the Microsoft Research Visiting Speakers Series. Alan's here today to discuss his book, Thinking in New Boxes, A New Paradigm for Business Creativity, which I see is actually named differently there. So 5 essential steps to spark the next big idea.
Well, the other one on top, right?
Perfect. Human brains really are not wired to think outside the box. Rather, we need boxes or mental modes, frameworks, and theories to make sense of the world's complexity. A strategy or vision help leaders interpret and simplify the complex world in front of them. Alan Eny is the Senior Specialist for Creativity and Scenarios at the Boston Consulting Group. He has trained thousands of executives, runs workshops, and speaks around the world about developing a new strategic vision for the future. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you all for being here. And thanks to those of you who have joined online as well. So, let's shut this first of all. What I'd like to do over the next little while is share some stories. When I do use slides, you'll find that they're hopefully not the typical Boston Consulting Group slides anyway, put it that way. Not the typical consultant slides. I'm going to show you some pictures, some cartoons, some visuals, and I encourage questions in whatever way or time you feel like. And then more time for Q&A at the end, but if something's really burning, don't hesitate. So let's start with some quick questions for you. Go for the audience engagement right up front. He's chuckling already. That means I should be warned. What is the probability that 5 years from today, September 19th, 2018, the amount of air travel in the world is 95% less than today? What is the probability?
Very small.
Very small? Zero? Okay. Different question. This is good warm-up. Getting warmed up now. Assume that it's September 19th, 2018, and this has come to pass. Assume that air travel has gone down by 95% since 5 years earlier. How did this happen?
Paradigm shift. A new way of transportation.
A new way of transportation, like teleportation, something like this. Okay, what else?
Quantum computer.
Quantum computer.
Carbon taxes.
Carbon taxes, right. Carbon taxes because energy got so expensive and only the richest 5% can afford to fly. Something like that. Something different.
Terrorism. Terrorists keep hitting.
Terrorism. People are scared to fly. 95 people are so scared to fly because there have been a lot of terrorist attacks. Something different.
Pandemic.
A pandemic, a bird flu, or something. Something different.
Star Trek becomes reality.
Star Trek becomes reality. Yes. Or more simply, there's just sort of game-changing new, 3D Skype type stuff that, okay, or teleportation, I don't care. Any of those, that's fine. All right, so how long was that? About a minute and a half. We just came up with 5 or 6 hypotheses. I'm not going to try and weigh how likely any of them are. We don't have to go back into the probability side, but we can agree surely that those 2 questions were fundamentally different in terms of the way you had to think. The first one, very deductive, logical, analytical. What is the probability of something? And you drew upon your knowledge and your intelligence to just spit out a number, 0 or whatever other number. The second one, more inductive, more ambiguous. I gave you a situation and invited you to make something up. That was the invitation to be creative, really. And you came up with a bunch of options very quickly using inductive thinking. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Let me ask a different question now. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Completely different question. How many colors are there in the rainbow?
all of them.
That we can
Okay, so some people start whispering their immediate reaction, seven, you know, that's what my 5-year-old niece would say, 7, yes, of course. But, okay, now you say all of them because there's a lot of people here who know about physics and white light and refraction and infinite number of, okay, yes, fine, correct. So, which of those answers actually is correct?
All of ancient.
Clarify the question.
What was the purpose of the question?
What was the purpose of the question? Now, see, now you're the one sounding like a consultant. That is good, though. Okay, so both of them, yeah. So 7, the way I see it, is a simplification that many of us have in our minds because we were taught it in kindergarten or whenever, which is a useful simplification of the model of physics. Okay, we'll come back to the rainbow. Something completely different. Last warm-up question. Have you been to Greece and seen the Parthenon? Any of you? Have you seen the Parthenon? Okay, good. Maybe a third of you have been there and seen. So those of you who have, and those of you who haven't, because I haven't, by the way. So Parthenon, even if you haven't been there, you can imagine in the Acropolis, a Greek temple in Athens, top of a hill. You can still have an image in your mind, right? Whether you've been there or not, you have an image of the Parthenon, yes? Okay, so everybody focus on this image. Look at it for a second. How many columns are there in front of the Parthenon?
11.
11. Other guesses?
16.
16. There's an interesting thing. 8, somebody said, and depends on why you ask the question.
What's the purpose of the question?
That's true too, yes.
Now or when it was built?
Now or when it was built. Well, happily, never mind the rainbow, we're done with that. But there are actually 8 along the front of the Parthenon, and it looks like the same number as when it was built. So here's another answer. It doesn't matter. Unless you happen to be a PhD in antiquities or a tour guide in Athens, it doesn't matter how many columns there are in front of the Parthenon. And let me pull this all together and explain what I mean with all of these warm-up questions. So, in the world, in front of us, we have our company, our life, our customers, our competitors, everybody who uses our products, everything, the entire world in all of its complexity and uncertainty and randomness and all the rest. Call this the world in front of us. And all we do all day long is take this and simplify it into these mental models within us, or what I'm about to start calling boxes. So these mental models, these boxes, can be very, very simple ones, like the rainbow has 7 colors, Roy G. Biv, or Canadians are nice, or whatever you want, right? Anything very, very simple. It can also be more complex ones like a market segmentation or a strategy or a model of accounting or the model of what we think about freedom or democracy, anything. All of these are mental models that we use as working hypotheses, as concepts, to simplify the world in front of us. Now, the rainbow, if you think about it, which we saw, it's exactly the same thing as a market segmentation. Because the market segmentation takes, 300 million customers in the US or 6 billion in the world on that side and turns it into 5 segments or 7 segments in the same way that the rainbow has an infinite number of colors coming into 7 in our model. The Parthenon as well is an example that most of these mental models we have are slightly fuzzy. We have a pretty good image of the logo of a company or a picture of the Parthenon or whatever the case may be. But if I ask you to describe the specifics of the logo of a company or how many columns there are in front of the Parthenon, it doesn't really matter. Your picture was still good enough for most of your day-to-day life, unless you happen to be a tour guide there, because all we do in our day-to-day life is actually use these models as well. In other words, we spend a lot of time coming up with these models in the creative process and then using them, using a market segmentation or any of these other models to go about our day-to-day. Now let me give you 2 or 3 examples just to try and cement this a little bit. One maybe from daily life, and then a couple from the business world. So imagine that you see a couple walking down the street. A man in his mid-50s, well dressed in a suit, gray hair, carrying a briefcase, yeah? And with him is a woman who is also elegantly dressed in a dress with a handbag, but she's quite a bit younger, so late 20s, maybe early 30s, something like this. So you see this image in the world in front of you. You cannot help but immediately, in 1 millisecond, come up with a box, come up with some working hypothesis for what these people... Maybe you see them and they say, oh, there are 2 colleagues walking on their way to a meeting. Or this is a husband and his second wife. Or I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, and we can have different versions of it, different boxes among all the people in this room and online, but whatever it is, you can't help but see this image in the world in front of you and then come up with a box. And over time, maybe if you see them later in a restaurant and you see that, they're looking over some printouts of financial stuff together and you say, oh, I was right, they're colleagues on their way to a meeting. Oh, I'm wrong, they're probably not spouses after all. And then at the end of the meal, maybe she says, thank you, Daddy, or something like that. Whatever it is, we keep going round in this circle as we get, it's the scientific method. As we get more information in the world in front of us, we update our working hypotheses. We change our boxes all day long, and this is a cycle of developing new boxes and using our boxes. And there's very, very simple terminology here for what these arrows represent: deduction and induction. And most of the time, like when I asked you what is the probability of something, like air travel going down 95%, most of the time we draw on our existing knowledge. We're asked a question, something like that. We use deduction to immediately spit out an answer. But then the second question I asked you before, imagine this has happened. Imagine a scenario here. How did we get there? That was inductive thinking. That was the invitation to be creative and come up with something new. So, you're with me so far. I see some nodding. Let me give you a business example to try and cement it even more. One of my favorites, Bic. I don't know if that pen you have in your hand is a Bic pen or something else, but Bic, I think most of us know, BIC, well-known French company. Most of us probably think of it now as a company that makes pens and lighters and razors and a lot of other plastic objects. But for their first 30 years, they only made pens. They were founded in the mid-40s, so imagine now that it's the 70s. And they are having a creative session because they want to come up with new ideas for growth. And for 30 years, they've only made pens, right? So the executives of this company gather together and they're coming up with new ideas. And, one of them says, for example, oh, we can make these 4-colored pens. I have this idea for what we can do. It's a fine idea. Oh, very interesting. Okay. And somebody else says, oh, we can make erasable pens because the properties of this new thing I've been working on. Okay, good, fantastic. And maybe we can make pens that say, Sheraton or Marriott or Microsoft on them and sell them to places like that. And then suddenly somebody else says, we can make lighters or razors, right? So first thought, what is the natural reaction of everybody else in the room? What? Yeah. I mean, we are a pen company. We are a pen company. You're crazy. You have a fever. You should go home early. Whatever it is. But with the benefit of 40 years of hindsight, we know that these ideas really opened the door to a lot of new possibilities for them. So what had to happen? Because here's a hint as to what had to happen. Bic did not invent the cheap disposable plastic razor. Gillette was already doing that. Bic did not invent the lighter either. This already existed. In other words, what I'm trying to say, nothing changed here. Nothing changed in the world. They did not invent anything new in the world. The only thing that changed was on this side of the equation, meaning in here. All they had to do was change their box from we are a pen company, at which point lighters and razors are completely stupid ideas, to we are a disposable plastic object company, at which point they're completely logical ideas and they make eminent sense. And this fundamental change in their mental model, in their box, opened the door to all sorts of new possibilities without coming up with a single new idea. Creativity does not need new ideas. Looking at existing ideas, looking at your company differently, changing the way you look at something is often sufficient to open the door to a lot of new possibility. So that's one story, the big story, and we can come back to it a bit after. But I want to tell you another one, lest you think that the idea of changing your box, of thinking in new boxes, of changing the way you look at things, only applies to the big existential questions like the grand vision of a company, we are this, we are that. So I give you another example just from last week. On the day the book launched, 9 days ago, I went across the street from my office in New York to a coffee shop. And at the register, instead of a tip jar, as is often present, there were 2 tip jars, actually. And in between the 2 tip jars, there was a piece of paper that said, there was a question on it. Which TV family do you prefer? The Huxtables from The Cosby Show, with an arrow pointing to this tip jar, or the Tanners from Full House and an arrow pointing to this tip jar? And I thought to myself, this is a new box. This is amazing. This is a new conception of what a tip jar can be. Because if you're thinking the way I was thinking, you realize that this is a question that maybe people feel very strongly about, and so they're more likely to leave tips. It's fantastic. It's a new box for the tip jar. So, and by the way, the Huxtable jar was much fuller than the Tanner jar. So I asked the ladies, this is interesting. Can I take a picture of this? So I took a picture and I tweeted it, and then I went and sat down. But then I came back up and I started talking to them some more because since I'm a consultant, I was very curious about what this actually meant. And they told me, they change the question every day and they try and come up with questions where people will feel very strongly. Like it was the US Open in New York last week. So the day before, the question had been, who's the greatest ever, Federer or Nadal, right? And people have a strong opinion. So they want to, and they said that the tips increased by 50% since they instituted this new thing. It's amazing. So I tell you this because to me it's an amazing example of a new box. These people could have gone through life with the old box of, okay, a tip jar is something I put here, but instead they reconceived it. They came up with a fantastic new box. It happened to make a huge impact on their life, on their take-home pay. And it was a brilliant thing affecting their tiny little slice of the world. So it doesn't have to be the grandiose vision of a company, which many of us, quite frankly, are not able, at least in a big company, are not able to impact directly. But you can do it to change something in your particular group, a particular problem you're facing, a midlife crisis, whatever it is. The idea of changing the way you look at something, coming up with a new box to interpret the world in front of you, can have dramatic impact on whatever the particular issue is. So, then of course, the obvious question is, okay, how do we think in new boxes? How can we come up with these types of solutions? And since the book, which many of you already have and others of you is at the back, since this book is meant to be a mass market business book published by Random House, there are happily 5 practical steps for how to think in new boxes. And so what I'd like to do now is just take you through each of them one by one. And in so doing, I'd also like to address one of the biggest issues that I see whenever I talk with people in the corporate world, which I do a lot at BCG, which is basically, if I ever ask a group of people, we could try it now, how many of you have in the last, 6 months, participated in some form of creativity exercise or a brainstorm, right? Almost everybody says yes. Almost everybody's done that in some way. And then when I say, how many of you have been unreservedly 100% delighted with the results, nobody's raising their hand anymore, right? So this is a common occurrence. It's absolutely not you. To me, this has to do with the way creativity sessions are set up. You know, people have this perception that all you need to do is gather 5 smart people together in a room and have a bunch of flip charts or post-its and a plate of cookies and say, all right, we need to grow, we need to cut costs, we need to solve this, solve that, whatever it is. Think outside the box, come up with a lot of ideas, right? People jump straight into that, and they do come up with a lot of ideas. You wallpaper the whole room with flip charts, and yet nothing really sticks, or the ideas don't really hit home or get implemented. It's not useful. It's not practical. And the claim I'm going to make and try and give you some suggestions towards fixing is that really this concept of the way it's done now is not sufficient, which is one of the reasons we wanted to write the book. So, the 5 steps. First step, doubt. Now, doubt has a bad rap. A lot of people think doubt is a bad word. You know, we want leaders who are confident and assertive and who can make a decision, and that's fine. I don't object to any of that. But I also think doubt is critical for the following reason. If we accept the fact that all of these boxes that we use, our working hypotheses, our strategies, all of these models are simply that. They're working hypotheses, which means they're subject to change, just like in the scientific method. If we accept that, then it means we have to doubt. We have to remember to challenge them sometimes. And yet, as human beings, we don't like doing that because we like having a routine, sticking to the same boxes, taking the same route to work every morning, looking at the monthly report with the same logic every month. And we don't like having to doubt, having to challenge our perspectives. And so, if we accept that all of our ideas are just working hypotheses, then we have to doubt them because we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We see the world through our own lenses. And the first problem with that is that we all use boxes to look at the world and they're subject to change. The second one, of course, is that we all have slightly different ones. So even if we all think BIC is a pen company, we might have slightly different approaches. And if we need to change our boxes, then you'll find that, you know, maybe the head of manufacturing might need to be convinced differently than the head of sales or the CEO. Maybe the head of manufacturing, when they think about going from pen company to disposable plastic object, you know, they say, okay, well, we know how to get the plastic, and if we just tweak the machine a little bit and the process flow, okay, I can see. Whereas the head of sales needs to look at revenue projections and so on, and maybe the CEO has a very emotional connection to the pen box because he founded the company 30 years before. And so we all see the world through our own lenses, and even if these boxes appear to be the same, they're not always. And this quote is not mine, it's from the philosopher Immanuel Kant, paraphrased a little bit. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And this is Immanuel Kant's favorite cartoon. So, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by actually doubting everything? Basically, we have to identify the current models that we are using to look at the world to the extent we can. You know, this is the way we do things around here. We're a pharma company and this is the way we do R&D. We're a defense contractor and this is the way we work with the government. We're Microsoft and this is the way we package and sell our products. Whatever it is, identifying some of the current ways, the current boxes you're using, and then thoughtfully challenging them. Recognizing, for example, that we cannot always go with our gut, go with our instinct, even though most of the time it does lead us in the right direction. You know, when we come up with these new ideas, these new potential boxes, we have a very natural tendency to say, oh, that's a crazy idea. The boss will never go for that. We tried something like that a couple years ago. The customers will never accept this. But how do we think about our customers? What boxes do we use to define our competition? What boxes do we use to look at the data that's in front of us? The more we can identify and thoughtfully challenge some of these mental models, the better off we will be and the more likely to get practical results. That's what I mean by doubt. And I'll give you a couple of visual examples just to illustrate this as well. This is one of my favorites. It's in chapter 3 of the book. what do you see?
A picture upside down.
A picture upside down of George W. Bush.
A metaphor for the economy.
Well, let me save you the trouble, actually, of going like this, okay? Because all of our minds immediately, and I've seen this 300 times or something, all of our minds immediately say this is George W. Bush upside down, but to save you the trouble, look what happened. So, somebody has photoshopped the mouth and the eyes so that it is a deformed image of the former president. Now, so a couple of points.
Can you go back?
Oh, I'll go back, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very interesting thing, actually, because first of all, to your point, you can do this with Obama or whoever you want as well, right? This is not meant to be a political statement. But more than that, and more relevantly, the interesting thing is that over and over, every time I see this, you're seeing it now for the second time, and when you open chapter 3, you'll see it for the third time. I'm seeing it for the 100th time. My mind immediately says, oh, it's George W. Bush upside down. Okay, great, fine. And I move on to whatever other thing. But the brain is lazy. Even when we know that it's been photoshopped, the brain is lazy when it processes information. It always goes for the simplest possible solution. Now, to be clear, most of the time, the brain is correct when it jumps to conclusions. Most of the time, in fact, this is an amazing benefit of being human that Microsoft and IBM and many others have spent billions of dollars trying to replicate, right? I mean, if you think about Watson trying to replicate the way the human brain works, or even the early chess-playing computers, whatever you want, there have been so many companies like you who've spent a lot of time and effort trying to replicate the way the human brain works. And yet, sometimes it leads us astray. Sometimes we need to doubt our initial instinct. Another example. What's this? Now you're not answering because you think I'm trying to trick you.
It's a tricky number.
Yeah.
This seems like a beaver can be a number.
Good point. Quite right. Because most people would immediately say 12, 13, 14. And yet, if I show you this, most people would immediately say A, B, C, and most people would not say A, 13, C, or 12, B, 14. Okay, what's the point? Again, there are multiple correct ways of interpreting things. And lest you get confused and think that this is only silly visual tricks, I'll give you a couple of examples from business, because it's really important. Let's take the annual report of a company, like Microsoft or any other. You have the annual report. You open it up. What's on the first page? Letter from the CEO, basically. Letter from the CEO, right? Yeah, the president, something. Okay, I'm going to oversimplify, just because that's what I do. And I'm going to tell you that there are only 2 possible letters from the CEO that could appear on this annual report. I'll tell you what they are. Number 1, dear shareholders, we have had excellent results this year thanks to some solid strategic decision-making, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Letter number 2. Dear shareholders, we have had disappointing results this year due to the recession, terrorism, volcanic ash, all this other stuff that was outside of our control. We're going to do better next time. So, are you ever going to have a letter that says, dear shareholders, we've had great results this year because we were very lucky and we hope that, or, you know, dear shareholders, we've had terrible results this year because we made some pretty stupid strategic decisions, but give us another chance. We promise we'll do better next year. No. And yet, all of the data, all of the subsequent pages of the report could be exactly the same, and you could have fundamentally different interpretations of this. That was a caricature, of course, an oversimplified example. But when you get a report of customer research or competitor intelligence or the latest industry trends, when you get this kind of stuff, again, there are multiple correct ways of interpreting all of these facts. There are multiple ways to interpret this kind of information, and the more we doubt, the more we challenge our perspectives and allow ourselves to look at it in fresh ways, the better. So that's what I mean by doubt. Now, Another cartoon showing a lot of different contexts. That one took me a few seconds when I first saw it. And here's one more, which actually is relevant to the corporate world and what often happens to so many of us. What it says at the bottom, I'll read it. This really is an innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's never been done before. So imagine your boss comes to you and says, hey, all right, we have this big problem. We really need out-of-the-box solutions. We need fresh solutions. And then you come back to her 3 days later with all sorts of ideas, and they say, oh, this is great. Can you just give me some benchmarks of where this has been done before so that we can justify it, right? It's very real. To doubt our initial perspectives like this boss is the hallmark, the first step, really, towards creativity. And it's the step that is most often skipped when people jump straight into a brainstorm without actually thoughtfully preparing. Okay, so the good news is I spend a lot of time on doubt on purpose because I think it's the one that's really important that a lot of people skip. I'm going to go quickly through the next few. The idea of exploring is to recognize that all of these ideas do originate in terms of what we get from the world. And so it's quite useful for a creative process to gather a set of inputs. And these can take the form of, the trends in your industry, all the stuff I said before, the customer research, competitive intelligence, network analysis, whatever you want. Gathering all of that is good as long as you remember to keep this atmosphere of doubt alive. And that is illustrated through this cartoon where at the bottom it says, just checking. Just checking. No matter how much data you have, no matter how well you try to predict the future, there will be surprises. We will not have perfect information, and there are multiple ways of interpreting the same information. So yes, gather all the data you want. We're in a world where people, especially in business, like to make decisions based on data, but take it with a dose of doubt. Take it with a grain of salt. And this is also another reminder of that in terms of thinking about the future. When we think about the future, there will always be these things that people have called wildcards or black swans, which are the high-impact but unanticipated events, like the volcanic ash, or, in the world of development, like Bill Gates announcing one day that he's giving all his money to charity. These are the sorts of things that are high-impact, generally unanticipated to the masses at least, but really change the world. And so, taking all of that, we also know that no matter how nicely our bar graphs purport to predict the future, no matter how much information we gather, we will never be able to do it properly. There will always be uncertainty and ambiguity inherent in the way we think. And so, given that the world in front of us has all of this uncertainty associated with it, we have to recognize that we are not good at it. And there's a lot of quotes like, Margaret Thatcher saying, I don't think there will be a woman prime minister in my lifetime. And of course, 7 years later, she proved herself wrong. There's no shortage of quotes like this. Albert Einstein once said, there's no indication that energy will be obtainable from the atom in 1932. Again, 12 years before or 10 years before, depending how you count. So a lot of people, no matter how smart, by the way, no matter how brilliant a CEO, have quotes like this that, purport to say, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. Remember these. Remember that we cannot do it. We have to explore with a dose of doubt. Then, the good news, the next steps, divergence and convergence. After you have doubted and explored the world in front of you with a dose of doubt, then you can go into divergence and convergence mode. And this is what most people think of as the classic brainstorm. The problem is they start here. But this is the classic. So divergence, get a lot of ideas on the table. Linus Pauling, double Nobel Prize winner, said the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And frankly, as long as you set your criteria in advance for what constitutes a good idea, which is another area where people often fall down on the job, because if they don't set their criteria in advance, then once you've come up with a lot of ideas, you're instinctively drawn to the ones that fit the boxes you had before. But if you set your criteria clearly in advance, like we need ideas that are implementable within less than 6 months, or cost less than X, or are consistent with our brand proposition, something, I don't know what. If you're very clear about constraints and criteria up front, it's a good thing. So you get a lot of ideas on the table, and then you converge. This is what we know how to do, the selection process, the prioritization. Now, one of the most frustrating things in the world is when half the room is in divergence mode, getting a lot of ideas on the table, and the other half is in convergence mode, systematically shooting them down and picking them apart. It's frustrating for these guys, and it's frustrating for those guys, right? And so remembering that there's a time for divergence and a time for convergence, both are important, but not at the same time. And it's also an interesting thing to think about, you know, some people might be naturally more divergent type thinkers, right? And some people more naturally convergent type thinkers. And this is an interesting thing when you think about your teams and leveraging people. And indeed, there were scientific studies about, you know, some of the great partnerships of all time. You know, Hewlett and Packard, or Rolls and Royce, and even one of the teams in that list was Bill Gates and Paul Allen, right? I'm not going to come here and talk to you about those guys, but the idea that in all of these sort of pairs, there was one who was generally the more divergent type, at least the way it was seen, and one more the convergent type. Taking advantage of both of these can be a really fantastic thing. So again, a time for divergence, getting a lot of ideas on the table. Thomas Edison, to me, exemplifies this. Please.
So when you say set your criteria in advance, that sounds like, to me, limiting the box. We're a pen company, and here's how in advance, and we're not going to evaluate ideas outside of that box. How is that different than setting your criteria in advance?
I'm glad you asked, actually, because people often go into a brainstorm or something and say, you know, we need to, you know, no constraints, blue sky, everything's on the table, right? And I actually don't believe in that. I actually believe that constraints can be very helpful for creativity, because if you know in advance that you need less than this, more than that, fit with this, whatever it is, then why not state it? And then the ideas that you eventually come up with through all of these creative approaches will actually fit with those constraints and be much more likely to be practical and implementable. That said, your point is well taken that we need to still allow ourselves to doubt and allow ourselves to challenge what's binding us. And so what that boils down to is we all use thousands, millions probably of boxes, taking the time to identify them and then figure out which ones of these constraints and assumptions we are actually willing to break, and many of them we won't. We can't change them all at the same time. There are some constraints that really are binding, and some that maybe if we challenge them, they're not. So Edison, again, you know, when he was on the verge of the light bulb, but had been working on it for a lot of time, and a reporter asked him, you know, are you ready to give up? And he said, no, I must be about to succeed, because now I know 999 ways that it doesn't work. This is what it is. This is what the divergence mode of getting all these ideas on the table is. And for me, one of the really interesting things about Edison is as follows. You know, with this incandescent electric light bulb, before that was invented, how did people make light? How was light created?
Chemical reaction on a container in the street.
A chemical reaction on a...
Cardboard, I think it was called.
Before the light bulb?
Yeah.
Yeah, but also oil, fireplace, wood, candles. Yes, all of these. Basically, you created light by burning something. Fair to say, overgeneralization, as always. Afterward, right, in the incandescent light bulb, and the scientists here know more about it than me, but basically there's a filament, and the idea is that the current goes through it, and the filament heats up and glows and so on, but it doesn't burn. So basically you create light by preventing something from burning. It's a fundamentally new box, kind of like the shift of the pen company. And before that shift happened, you could have a lot of incremental innovations. You could improve your oil or improve the type of wood you use, and afterward you could too. You could try different things for the filament or different types of glass. And these types of incremental innovations can be very good ideas, by the way. Nobody is saying that the four-colored pen and the erasable pen and all these things are bad ideas. They're just not transformational ideas that forced you to change the box. two-bladed razor, three-bladed razor, iPhone 3, iPhone 4, iPhone 5. You know, these are not as transformational as the original razor or the original iPhone, if you see what I mean. So, again, when you do this kind of creative session, you'll have no way of knowing a priori up front which are the more incremental and which are the more transformational ideas. Both can be valuable and profitable, but it's the transformational ones that really require you to change the box. And also, you'll have no way of knowing which are the good ideas and which are the bad ideas up front. All the more reason to allow for divergence and then narrow things down in the convergence phase. And there's a lot of questions in chapter 5 and 6 that can help you with that. There's also a lot of them online and all over the place. How to get a lot of ideas on the table by challenging your perspectives. And so, you know, if you're trying to cut costs, put yourself in the shoes of Ryanair or Toyota. How would they do it? How would Disney improve the situation for our customers? What if we had billions of dollars to do a joint venture with the New York Times? How would I have approached this problem the day after I graduated from college? How would my grandmother think about our company? Things like this, changing perspective, trying new analogies, all of these are useful techniques to get quantity, to get a lot of ideas on the table. Now, fifth, last step, reevaluate. No good idea is good forever. And this is a very simple scientific thing for me, because if the world is constantly changing, there's no doubt about that, and our ideas, our boxes, are relatively fixed. So at some point, every box will be out of date. And this can be any good idea, the Model T Ford, the iPhone, penicillin, or anything else, will at some point not be good anymore. And so it's a question of, do we proactively foster doubt and challenge our perspectives and try to come up with the next big thing? Or do we wait for someone else to do it, at which point we have to play catch up because the world has passed us by? And so those are really, to me, the two, oversimplified, but still the two choices. I give you a couple of demonstrations of this. Imagine I'm building something piece by piece here. And I've just added the first three pieces. Now, before I add the fourth, just like the two people walking down the street, your mind has created a box of what it is that I'm building. So what is it that I'm building?
The floor plan of an apartment.
The floor plan of a building, yeah. Something else?
H.
The letter H, capital H, yes. Something else?
Maze.
A maze? Okay. Three perfectly reasonable possibilities. Let me add the next piece. What happened? So if it was the floor plan of a house, okay, it can still sort of be, if it was the maze, it can certainly still be a maze. But if your box was that I was building the letter H, I forced you to update your working hypothesis. I forced you to change your box. And this is, again, a quick visual example, so you didn't really care too much, but what ended up happening is, in a split second, when I added that extra piece, you suppressed an urge to run up here and say, no, that's not how it goes. And then you quickly changed from an H to a maze or something else and moved back to whatever else your mind was doing. All of that in a split second, I think. Because we don't like it, actually, when we have to change our box. We don't enjoy the process. You were probably, even if you had an H in your mind, you were probably, for a split second, annoyed with me for forcing you to change your box. But then you got over it really quickly because it doesn't really matter and so on. But in the business world, it can be hugely impactful. And a great example is Henry Ford and the Model T. You know, Henry Ford was an amazing entrepreneur and innovator, and in fact the whole reason it was called the Model T is because he started with A and kept trying different things, right? It's true. But what happened afterward? You know, this car, he invented the assembly line, he improved the undercarriage, it was the first mass market car, fantastic. It sold 15 million units, and so even today it's one of the best-selling cars of all time. Amazing. But then what happened? You know, the world kept changing around him. General Motors started making higher end versions and lower end versions and blue cars and different colored cars. And Henry Ford famously said at that time, my customer can have any color car they want as long as it's black. He went into denial. He fired people for coming to him and saying that they should change. Because in his mind, the box was still, the Model T is the future of our company. It's the future of the automotive industry. He refused to adapt. And it's just a reminder that no matter how smart or innovative or brilliant a person, we are all human beings. And we all have to push ourselves sometimes to reevaluate, to go back to the beginning and start doubting again. Surviving success can actually be just as difficult as succeeding in the first place, as a lot of companies know very, very well. So, there is good news, however. And the good news, I'll give you again in a visual. Yes, we don't like it when we have to change our perception, but the good news is this. Now, this is not a piece of modern art. There is hidden in here a perfectly symmetrical, elegant, five-pointed star. Just shout out or raise your hand or something when you see it. Okay, you see it? Okay, let's save a bit of time. Imagine that imagine that this picture is divided into 4 quadrants. Which quadrant is the star in?
Upper right.
Upper right. Okay, so divided into 4. It's in the upper right. Does that help? Okay, somebody else sees it. Somebody else. Somebody else. Another one. More people are nodding. Now people are helping their neighbors. And now people are nodding even though they don't see it because they don't want to be left out. Okay, but look, here it is. First of all, this is the one you saw, I'm sure. And now everybody sees it. But look, if I take it away, you can't really not see it anymore. So even though we don't like it when we have to change our boxes, once we do, there's no going back. Once we realize that we can be more than a pen company, or that we can change our perspective on what a tip jar is, or anything else, there's no going back, which is an amazingly helpful thing and a consolation after the story of Henry Ford and the Model T. So let me give you one more story, and then we'll jump quickly to Q&A. Reuters. You know the company Reuters? If I asked you to describe the business they're in, you'd probably say, news delivery or stock price delivery or something like that, yeah? So they were actually founded in 1851 by Julius Reuter in Prussia, now Germany. And what was their original box at the time? Well, it was news and stock price delivery. It was exactly the same, 160-something years ago. Mostly at the time between the United Kingdom and Europe, back and forth across the English Channel. So how did they do it then? They had a fleet of carrier pigeons. They had several hundred carrier pigeons that would carry the news and the stock prices. And the reason this is such a fantastic example, in my mind, of reevaluation is because, for Reuters, in order to stay exactly the same, in order to keep doing the same thing, they had to change from carrier pigeons to the telegraph, to the radio, to satellite. There was telex somewhere in there, and satellites, and internet, and high-speed fiber optic cables. The point is, in order to keep doing exactly the same thing, they had to fundamentally reinvent themselves 6 times. And of course, at each stage of the game, there were, let's test this thing out, but not get rid of the pigeons just yet. Let's try it out. Oh, there's some competitors. Maybe some of these guys will go bankrupt. I mean, it's not to be taken for granted that they were able to reinvent themselves over and over and over again. This, to me, demonstrates an amazing capacity to reevaluate and change, and is an example of the fact that, again, there's 2 choices. Either we can reevaluate proactively, come up with the next big thing and transform our company like BIC, or keep doing the same thing, in which case we're also going to have to fundamentally transform ourselves, which is kind of what's happening in the book industry or in the newspaper industry or a lot of industries, quite frankly, trying to find new ways to sell books and all the rest of it. So at the end of the day, reevaluation to me is so important, and Reuters is a fun example. So let me leave you then with one last thing. This goes back to doubt, right? And we as human beings have this amazing capacity, even with half of the word hidden, to be able to look at this and realize that it says, be creative, right? And yet, if you imagine Watson, the Jeopardy playing computer, it would, of course it does it quickly, but it would have to look at it and explore all the possible combinations and what might it say, and then eventually 98% probability that it says be creative. But we have this amazing ability to just jump and in an instant see that. And so my message to you, my hope, is that you will find ways to continue to challenge your boxes and look at things in fresh ways and to be creative, which starts with doubt. It starts with doubt. Be creative, but always doubt. So with that, thank you very much. You know now where to find me, how to track me down. There's also things like LinkedIn and all the rest of it. So don't hesitate. For those of you who've already got the book, I really hope you enjoy it, and I'm more than happy to sign it. And for those of you who haven't yet, you can. But again, thank you so much for having me on campus. And let's talk. If you have questions, let's go through them. Please.
So in organizing a session, trying to create new ideas, trying to innovate, how do you sort out? Like how do you bring in the right kind of people who have kind of doubt everything, or do you set the context in some way that, hey, we need to doubt all the analysis we have?
Well, I think that first of all, setting an environment where people feel comfortable doubting is really important, and that means a culture where you can take creative risks and where you can challenge each other regardless of hierarchy. Things like that absolutely help. But for the actual session itself, once you've established that culture, to me, since we are all humans and since we are all, business-like and so on, it's different than a regular meeting. And the idea of a warm-up exercise or something can really be valuable. I'll tell you one of my favorites, just to get people in the right frame of mind. Try and describe your company without using the most obvious words. So take Starbucks, just for the hell of it. If I ask anyone on the street to describe Starbucks, they'll say it's a chain of coffee shops or a coffee shop or something. But if I ask you to describe Starbucks without using the words coffee, tea, snacks, or meeting place, I'm imposing constraints on you. I'm forcing you to think about it differently. And now people will say, oh, Starbucks is the world's largest office. Starbucks is a massive renter of real estate. Starbucks is yuppie headquarters. I don't know, whatever you want. And then when you're getting warmed up like this, okay, maybe the world's largest office thing really piqued something in you guys. And so maybe you want to start selling pens, like Bic, or maybe you want to install printers and sell printing for $1 a page, or maybe in select Starbucks locations you want to install conference rooms in the back and rent those. These might not be good ideas, by the way, but the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. So I'm just throwing a lot of things out there, and it's a fun warm-up. There's a lot of other ways to get people in the right frame of mind. Here's the prizes for asking good questions. What else? Anything else? Please.
So the number of examples you gave were industries which sort of just adapted, but still had the core business, like Ford still had his auto industry, Bic still makes pens today, things like that. Do you have any comments about areas where the whole industry is gone? The canonical example is always, buggy whips when we move from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles and engines. Any comments about when a whole industry disappears and the company needs to basically not just hold on and use what their existing revenue source and expand upon it a bit perhaps, but they totally need to.
A good question. And for the benefit of those online, I'm just going to paraphrase it, which is, what happens, Bic started with pens and expanded. And most of the common examples are like that. But what about other situations, what about when your industry is dying and you're trying to figure out what to do, and Borders went the way of the dinosaur while Barnes & Noble survived, and so on and so forth. So a couple of thoughts. Yes, BIC is the most common example in terms of expanding in that way, but I give you the example of Danone. If I ask you Danone, it happens to be French as well, Danone, but Danone, if I ask you what you think of them now, you'll probably say yogurt and baby food and water and health food type stuff. But originally, well, forget originally, before that, they were in the business of just creating good quality food. They were more like Nabisco or General Mills. They just had a whole bunch of food things. And then they decided to focus on the food that's good for you. Instead of good food, they switched the box to food that's good for you. They sold their beer division, they sold their cookies division, and they focused entirely on this stuff. So that's just to say that it doesn't have to be expanding like BIC. It can be contracting or anything else. And then more broadly than that, in terms of dying industries, right? To me, at the root of your question is, where do the next transformational type things come from? Because either they can come from the Fords or whoever else of the world, or they'll come from some, Hewlett-Packard in their garage, or Zuckerberg in the dorm room, or whatever you want. And it feels like those latter types are very common, although there's probably examples of both. So let's take Netflix as an example, because they, Blockbuster, in theory, could have changed from this box of DVDs in a store to DVDs by mail. There was nothing remarkably, there wasn't really some new technology other than switching from VHS to DVD, but it wasn't Netflix that invented that. They were just taking advantage of things. And so Blockbuster, by virtue of being a big company, in some ways was stuck in this existing box and trying to maximize this and maximize sales per square feet and all the rest. And they got blindsided by this brilliant new box. Maybe if they had doubted a little bit more, they might have enabled themselves to come up with it. So Netflix went along, millions of subscribers in this DVDs by mail box, fantastic. The world keeps changing around them, and now there's this whole streaming thing coming, right? And Netflix decides, we're going to split into two for our streaming business and the mail business. And this, of course, was a debacle. They lost a lot of money. They were a little bit too early, basically. They recovered, and now yet another new box. Who would ever have thought that a company like Netflix would do original television programming? Right? So it's to me about reevaluation, and it can come from you or it can come from some young upstart, but it's up to you in a sense.
It seems like the two things are just being aware and not being denial.
Doubt and reevaluating, which is my way of saying the same thing. Yes, quite right. Please.
So a couple things, or two questions kind of related. One, looking at Kodak, that's recently kind of made one of these shifts. Kind of what do you think, how do you think they got to where they are? And then we've talked about sort of making a shift but not then following through on it. Do you have sort of thoughts on what Kodak needs to be aware of and needs to do to continue through with the new direction they've taken?
So I confess that I don't know enough about the very recent stuff about Kodak to give an intelligent answer. But, the fact of them being late to the whole digital game is to me another example of, having one's lunch eaten by young upstarts, right, in the photo business, and struggling to play catch up once the world sort of partly passes you by. And I don't remember if there was bankruptcy or not, but there was certainly a huge financial dip when that happened. And then, but I don't know enough about the company specifically to say much more. Forgive me. Please.
Okay, so you praise the phase of having a lot of ideas to go to one ideas. That process is kind of a challenge or a piece of art. Do you have technique? Do you have any technique how to go from lots of ideas to one idea to the trees?
Yeah, so the idea of convergence, of going from lots of ideas down to one or three or five or seven. I mean, there's a lot of selection processes, but whenever I'm doing a brainstorm or creative type thing, I do find that there's a lot of different ideas. Like if you look around all the flip charts that people put up ideas on the wall, there's a lot of apples and oranges. There are some ideas that are very, oh wow, this one we could implement with a team starting tomorrow. It's very clear we should just get on with it. And this one, oh, it's an interesting possibility, but it needs a lot more research and needs to be more fully baked and so on. So there's often different categories. Once you agree on what the criteria and the constraints are for individual categories, then there's a lot of ways of doing it. The simplest is to vote. The simplest is just to ask people, what are your top 2 in this category and your top 2 in that category, and see how people feel. Or maybe in a more dictatorial place, the boss will just decide. Or maybe you can do a secret vote, or you can ban people from voting for their own ideas to force them to think a little bit differently. Or you can give everybody 4 votes instead. But at the end of the day, I don't know any way other than just choosing and deciding.
Okay, there's a governance process generally that comes in place at the point.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is, that's what it is. There's a question from online as well.
Online we have one person writes, strangely in my experience, people who doubt everything are considered doubters. I would think healthy skepticism is a more conscious effort at weighing the options. How do you find the right balance?
Yes, I agree with you. And just to paraphrase the question for those who couldn't hear, it was, people who doubt everything are known as downers. And how can you actually be a good manager if you're just doubting everything and second-guessing everything and so on? I think that's the gist of the question. And what I tell my clients, because it's a fair question, is always doubt, but never hesitate. In other words, you have to always doubt, because all of your boxes are just arrived at by induction. They're working hypotheses, everything we've seen. So you have to be willing to challenge them at the right time. However, a manager who's only doubting and constantly second-guessing everything and never making a decision is not a recipe for success. And so once you do make a decision, you implement it. Off you go. The machine is broken, we fix it. You can't hesitate. Always doubt, but never hesitate when it comes time to make a decision. And if you need to reevaluate it and go around this circle again, then that's what you do. But you do have to make decisions as managers. There's no doubt about it. Please.
Okay, so...
And I'm sorry I have no more of these things.
Well, that's the only reason I raised my hand.
I can mail you one.
Excellent. Okay, so let's say that... let's say we take this new information that we've just learned from you today, and we go to our next meeting at 3 o'clock, and we go through this brainstorm process, and we have a healthy discussion and implement some of the things and some of the 5 steps that you've talked about. And with doubt, there's oftentimes resistance. So when everyone knows, like, this is a great idea, but the decision maker, let's say it's your manager in that case, how do you bring people on board who are resistant to going in this direction of being able to think about creating their own boxes that have never been seen before?
I'll just, to paraphrase, I'll just repeat the end of your question, which is how do you bring people on board? If you're ready to doubt and ready to jump in and so on, how do you bring your manager and others along with you? And to me, that boils down to, you remember what we were saying before about the different big people where the head of manufacturing has this box for this reason, and the head of sales needs to see that, and the CEO has this emotional connection. The more you actually understand where people are coming from, which may have to do with their incentives or their culture or how long they've been there or whatever else, but why they're holding the boxes that they are, to me that's at the heart of the answer. Because if you actually say, all right, let's identify some of these constraints. This is the way we've always done it. This is the way we've always thought about our customers. And you are ready. You're willing to challenge 1 or 2 of those constraints and really think about the customers differently. But your boss isn't. Why is that? Is it because they are about to change jobs in 3 months and don't care? Is it because they're the ones who implemented the previous customer model, and so they're kind of attached to it because it'll make them look bad if you come up with a better one? Or whatever it is, to try and understand which boxes others are holding and why is the beginning of bringing them along for the ride. At the end of the day, just like it's reasonably well known that you can't force somebody to go on a diet or stop smoking unless they actually want to jump in and doubt, right? You can't force somebody to doubt and to change their boxes, but you can help. You can try and bring more information, try and understand where they're coming from, and try and make a difference in that way. Okay, I think one more. You had a question? No. Okay.
There is one more. Is doubting everything, will it slow the organization down by doubting everything?
That is an interesting question. Will it slow the organization down by doubting everything? You know, I'd like to think that maybe with a short-term view, it might. If you actually take time to sit with a blank sheet of paper for half an hour, yes, it will slow you down by half an hour. But to me, the impact and the results of doing so are well worth it. The idea of challenging your perspectives and looking at things in fresh ways can open so many new doors that the actual half hour it takes in terms of slowing things down, or whatever, it may be more than a half hour, is well worth it. All right, so let me pause there because it's 2:40 and I know others. I'm happy to talk individually, happy to sign, whatever you guys want, but thank you again for having me. I enjoyed talking about it. And